if you're not quite sure what color to check, take a look at the stream bottom, because your bait fish and any of your smaller food items are going to take on the color of that stream bed. So, I mean, I've seen it. I mean, I've done river samplings where we've shocked sculpins that are, tan in one stretch of river and go 100 feet down river, and the bottom is like a mossy color, and they're like almost jet black.
That was Rich Strolis providing a tip on choosing the color of your next fly. Streamers and a couple of good rants today on the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. I am very excited to share a second podcast that we launched that will be a huge help to you if you're interested in growing your business online. Head over to outdoorsonline.co and listen to the show right now. And if you get a chance, I would love it if you can share this with another person to help get the word out here about the new show. Rich Strolis is on the podcast today to share a different perspective on fly fishing and on life. Find out why he thinks some of the people are dumbing down fly fishing, why he loves Ahrex hooks, and how he retired at 45 but still isn't slowing down.
A quick word from our sponsor. GotFishing.com is your trusted source of information with access to the world's best fishing trips. You'll never pay a dime extra for the trip you book, and in many cases, less than advertised. Find out where Got Fishing could take you by heading over to GotFishing.com today. That's GOTFishing.com, or reach them by phone at 208-630-3373. GotFishing.com, the easiest place to start your next fishing adventure.
So without further ado, here is Rich Strolis from CatchingShadows.com. How's it going, Rich?
Good. Real good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Yeah, thanks for coming on. We we were chatting just for briefly there off air. I think Kelly Galloup, your name's definitely hopping around there a lot on the streamer side and some other things. Kelly, we chatted, and I think he mentioned you originally. So yeah, we're going to dig into probably a little bit on streamers and some other topics. But maybe before we jump into everything you have going now, you could talk about how you first got into fly fishing and then how that came to be into writing books and everything else you do.
Right on. It might be a little bit lengthy. I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version of it. So I'm in Connecticut. I live about 5 minutes from the Farmington River and about 40 minutes from the Housatonic. But I originally grew up in Western Massachusetts, about 30 minutes north of here. And I got into fly fishing when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I started out with conventional tackle, fishing small brook trout streams and a couple of close ponds nearby for like bass and stuff like that. And that was, my grandmother kind of got me into that because my dad was a self-employed carpenter, so he was working quite a bit. But he was a big fisherman. He had all kinds of fishing gear in his basement. So I was always kind of infatuated with that. I think the thing that probably got me steered towards fly fishing was his fiberglass Fenwick fly rod that was hanging up in the rafters down in his shop in the basement. And he would never let me touch it. So about the time I was 10, I think, roughly 10 or 11, because I kind of already caught the fishing bug as it was, I would go all the time. My really close aunt got me a fly rod for Christmas. It was one of those like package deals. I think it was a Cortland, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. I think it was a 5-weight, like a 9-foot 5-weight, came with a line, the whole 9 yards. And basically that year I hit the ground running. My dad gave me I guess you could say a crash course in casting in the backyard. And I had just went with it. And then that year, the next Christmas, because, you know how fly fishing goes, it's a big progression. So I wanted to tie flies. So the next year when I was 10 and a half, 11 years old, my aunt got me a fly tying kit, and the rest is kind of history. So I'm 45 now, so I've been doing this for about 35 years.
Oh, wow.
And it just kind of progressed as it went. I kind of broke into the fly fishing industry side of things kind of by accident. So, you know how it is. You kind of you get to certain points in your life, and college kind of comes around, and I was playing sports and doing other things. So fishing kind of got put by the wayside a little bit. And then I kind of jumped right back into it with both feet. And, I was a self-taught kind of fly fisherman and tyer as well. So I learned from like books. So I'm kind of I'm more the old school mentality, I guess. So like, I think I learned how to tie flies off like the Dick Stewart book of tying.
Mm-hmm.
And, I still have an affinity to books. I have quite the collection. A lot of them I still read over and over again, but I did things kind of that way. And then I got proper instruction in fly tying kind of backwards. I did it after the fact. And it was funny because one of the classes I went to, there was a very well-known commercial tyer who owned a shop on the Farmington named Dave Goulet. And he was just he had the biggest fingers you'd ever known, but the guy could tie the tiniest flies with super precision. And he's kind of an unsung hero in the area. Like a lot of stuff that we fish today can be attributed to a lot of designs and techniques that this guy came up with. And he's one of those like lesser known people in the industry. Like if you were to poll a bunch of people, they probably didn't even know who he is. And I remember taking a class with him, and I think the second fly into the class, he comes over to me and he drops my money on the table and he goes, "Get out of here." And I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "You know how to do all this stuff." He's like, you don't need a lesson. And I didn't quite know how to take it. Dave was one of those like really grizzled old guys. So like he either liked you or hated you. And we kind of, we grew up in the same part of Western Massachusetts and fished a lot of streams. So me and him kind of really hit it off. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, well, I kind of want to learn from you because you're like one of the best I know at it. And I go, I'm not taking my money back. So it's kind of funny in that respect. And then a few years later, I bumped into, I was a chairhead for, or I guess you could say like a board member for one of the fishing clubs. There's a club on the river called the Farmington River Anglers Association. And, it's like every fishing club. I think it's gotten a little better nowadays, but there's always more older folk involved in it, less younger people. And there's always like a small percentage of the people that are really hyper involved in it. So they saw that I was one of those guys that was fishing all the time and, was really interested in everything. And they were like, we'd like to have you on the board. So I ended up getting a board chair spot, not knowing what I'm getting into. And my first job there was to basically bring speakers in.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and you know how clubs are. And clubs have gotten a lot better now. They used to be really archaic, like 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I said, well, what about if we, try and bring in some bigger name speakers so that, we'll get more of a draw and then hopefully we'll get more people to want to join the club. So that right around the same time this was all going on, there's a guy from a professional photographer who was like, I guess you could he likes to call himself like a bug nerd because he's kind of like a amateur entomologist by the name of Thomas Ames. And he came out with a book on aquatic insects, and it was kind of a groundbreaking book for fly fishermen because he basically molded this book around, here's a hatch, here's some flies that you can tie to fish that hatch, which nobody really kind of done in that order, and then talk about the insect and whatnot. So I said, well, why don't I try giving this guy a call and see if he'll come down. So and mind you, in all of this, I had a whole other career and I was working like third shift. So I would typically come home from work at night in the morning, and I'd either fish all day or I'd catch some sleep and then go fish all day. So this was pre-kids, pre-marriage. I was engaged to my wife, the whole 9 yards, right? So sorry if I'm getting a little
No, go for it. This is great.
Good story. So I get in touch with Tom, and he's like, yeah, I'd love to come down. And I said, hey, if you want, I go, because he's coming from New Hampshire, which is, I want to say it was like maybe a 2.5 hour ride for him to come down. I said, why don't you come down for the day and we'll go fish the Farmington for the day, and then you can give your talk and whatever. So sure enough, he did that. He came down. I took him fishing on the river for the day. We totally hit it off. And he gave a great talk, and then we became friends. And like literally like a week later, and I had been dabbling with the idea of like guiding and stuff. And this was, almost 20 years ago. So he was like, I get an email from him like the following week, and he goes, I know you got a busy schedule. You burn the candle at both ends, because I was young at that time, and my motto was kind of like sleep when you're dead.
Yep.
So I would operate on like hardly any sleep. He's like, but he goes, I think I still have the email. He's like, you really know what you're doing on the river. You have a great handle on this insects, different place to fish, where the fish are at. He goes, you'd make an exceptional guide if you'd ever think about it. Hey, here's the name of an owner of a fly shop. on the Housatonic. I already gave him your name. He'll be expecting a call if you want. Give him a shout. So I called the owner of the shop. Like that was kind of like the push that I needed. Called the owner of the shop like that week. Guy hires me on the spot. It was basically like trial by fire. So I was next thing you know, I did my first guide trip that March on the Housatonic, which is not a very good time of year to take anybody fishing there because it's a very fickle fishery. And then I just hit the ground running. So I was working my other job, and then I think that first year I did about 70 guide trips, and then that turned into about 100 to 125 a year plus working the other job and everything else. So I had basically was juggling 2 careers, and it just kind of ballooned by accident. By about the second year, I think I'd worked there. I ended up going out on my own. It just was a better fit for me. And then it just kind of exploded. And then, to the point where, my schedule was like a 5-on, 3-off schedule. So I was guiding all 3 of my days off during the season. And then I had, depending on what shift I worked, I would basically come home from work in the morning. Some weeks I'd work like 8 days in a row or 20-something days in a row. And I'd hook the boat up when I got home from work, float somebody all day, go home, sleep like 4 hours, go in and work third shift. And then that was kind of like my life. And then we decided to have a family, my wife and I. And it was relatively manageable with 1 daughter. But then when we had our second daughter, it became too much. And thankfully, I have a halfway decent head on my shoulders. And I realized that my family is the most important thing. So I decided to kind of step away from guiding. And that was, I think, right around 2011-ish, somewhere around there. But I didn't want to kind of, dispel the business that I had, because I'm like, this is really something I want to do when I leave that other job, which I'm actually doing so next month. I'm retiring from that. So I was like, how am I going to keep this going? And at that time, I had made a lot of really good connections. I kind of broke into the fly fishing industry per se. I got invited to some tying shows and stuff because some people had heard about some of my flies, and that's where I became friends with a lot of different guys in the around my age group in the fly fishing industry and older people. So one of them, which a really good friend of mine, he's like a brother from another mother, is Mike Schmidt.
Oh yeah.
And talking to Mike Schmidt, and I said, dude, I'm really kind of at a crossroads right here. I don't know what to do. I really don't want to dispel my business. I want to say this was because I dabbled in the tying a little bit for people right around like 2009-ish, 2008. And I told him, I said, I've gotten kind of prodded by a bunch of different people, customers and stuff. Tom Ames himself, because he actually put a few of my flies in a couple of his books because he was impressed with them. So I was like, I was thinking about getting into doing some commercial tying. I got the knack for it. I can tie for speed. It doesn't bother me. I kind of enjoy it. I always like, tactile things with my hands. When I was in middle school, I worked at a blueberry farm, and I hit one of the jobs I had that I kind of cornered myself into was building boxes for the blueberries. So I was kind of an opportunist, and I saw that, hey, all right, well, these boxes are 11 cents a piece. If I do 100 of these an hour, I'm making like $11 an hour. For a kid that's like 13, 14 years old, that's pretty good, at the time. So the fly tying thing kind of seemed like a natural progression. Mike said, yeah, man, go for it. And here I am thinking, I'm just going to tie a few bugs for people, maybe, I don't know, a few dozen or whatever a year. The first year I wrote it down. Charlie Craven has done the same thing. I think he's closing in on 1 million something flies, that guy. But I think the first year I tied 22,000 flies for people.
Damn.
Which completely blew my mind. So, and at that time I had changed shifts at work. So I went from working third shift to second shift. So basically I was home in the morning with my kids, and before I went to work while my wife was working. And then if I had time while they were taking naps or whatever, I'd be spinning some bugs there. Or when I came home from work at night at midnight, I tied at like 3 a.m. And then, on my days off, I would put in some days like 18 hours. So that kind of filled the void. And then, that just snowballed. I've had a lot of awesome things come my way, but I worked hard for it. Obviously, it wasn't just kind of given to me. But I got several flies with Montana Fly Company now. I was asked to write a book. Did that a few years ago. I'm supposed to be writing a couple more, which I've been kind of slacking on because it's a huge writing a book is a lot of work. And it cuts into your fishing time too. So,
Yep.
So that's kind of where I'm at now.
Huh.
And now my life and my other side has kind of come full circle. In the last year, I've actually been able to get back out on the water and guide people. I'm spoiled because I live next to some great water, so I always get an opportunity to get out and fish. But it's kind of taken a whole new meaning for me at this stage of my life. But that's kind of where I'm at now. And now it's kind of stinks that we're in this position we're in now with this situation, because now I'm getting ready to kick my guide season off, and it's basically all question marks. So thankfully, still tying some flies for people every day. I've got orders and stuff coming in, but I'd much rather be out there on the water with, I'm sure, thousands and thousands of other guides out there. I feel their pain. It's kind of weird situation we're in. So that's where I'm at right now.
That's cool.
So,
yeah, that's a good intro. I got all sorts of questions that come up from, talking about that. I mean, one thing I guess just up front is you're a police officer, right, for your day job?
Yeah, I've been I never really kind of divulged that to people until like the last year or two. But yeah, I've been a member of the Connecticut State Police for this my 20th year. In fact, the 7th April is my retirement date. So
you're retiring this year?
Yeah, I'm retiring like in a couple weeks.
Wow. See, that's the amazing thing about, I've got a friend that's in the fire department, and I mean, obviously it makes sense. You guys are in a dangerous line of work, and I mean, being able to retire at 45, it just seems like an amazing thing, man. You planned it well. And I've had a couple of police officers on. Dean Finnerty was the first one, and he told a crazy story about dressing up in disguise or something like that. But I mean, how does it feel now? I mean, you're retiring. Do you plan to go even further all in on fly tying and fly fishing?
Yeah, so I kind of had this plan once I kind of got into the industry side of things like 18 years ago. I was like, this would be a great, I realized early on, I mean, police work is a thankless job. It's a very rewarding line of work. It's, it can be prestigious. It's not really looked at that way as much nowadays. I think, it's times have changed, and I've kind of seen that over my career, not to get on a soapbox with it, but, I kind of realized early on that this is going to be a long career if I'm in my uniform every single day. And, it doesn't really matter what kind of line of work you do. I think it's all about having a good, happy life balance. Mm-hmm. So, and for me, like people who know me, I'm super passionate about fly fishing. I mean, I have friends that are like, one of my really good friends, Mike, that I used to fish with a lot before we started families. He's a huge bow hunter, and this guy's been trying to get me into bow hunting for 15 years now. And I told him, I said, Mike, I love you, buddy, but if I get into bow hunting, I would probably end up divorced, because I just don't do things. I kind of take them to the nth degree, so, but what was nice is I realized that, I'm very, very lucky that I have a passion that I can turn into a career. It's almost like being a professional athlete. And I know a lot of guides feel the same way, that when they choose this career path, like when you get involved in something like this, it's almost like you're not working. So I planned things well. My wife is super, super supportive. So I realized that this was going to be my end game. And, I hate to use the retirement word, because it sounds it sounds kind of obnoxious for me to say at 45 years old that I'm retiring. I just like to say that I'm going into a career change, really, because that's kind of what I'm doing. So, the beauty of it is the last few years, and it's multifaceted. So the nice thing is I have the fly tying thing there, and teaching people how to tie flies. And then I've got the guide facet of it, and, teaching people facets of fly fishing, and, reliving all those different cool things that you've experienced, like your first fish, your biggest fish, all that stuff with clients. And then, I got into hosting some trips too, which, is a whole other ball of wax. I don't know how much of that I'm really going to continue to do, because it's fun and you get to go to some cool places, but it's time consuming, and it can be labor intensive depending on the group of people you bring. So, so that's kind of where it's at. I've been very fortunate. It's kind of weird. Like, I never would have thought, if you told me that this was going to be my life path when I was in high school. I mean, like, the law enforcement career was never something that I aspired to do. Like, it's not like, I have friends that were, lifelong. That's what they had their mindset on it when they were kids. This is what I'm going to do. Yeah. That wasn't me.
why did you choose, or if you had to choose, say, between, I mean, you've kind of done both, but between being a police officer or a full-time fly fishing tying industry person, which one would you choose if you had to go back 20 years?
I wouldn't change anything that I've done. But I definitely think I probably would have stuck with the fishing side of things. I probably wouldn't lived as comfortably as I have. But, it's kind of hard. I mean, it's really, looking back on my career, I've had a really good career and I got to do some really awesome things. I spent 5 years in our training division for our agency, which is where it's kind of funny. Some people are like, oh, why didn't you try to get promoted and move up the ranks? And that's really not what I want, why I joined that particular, line of work. I said, I felt like I had a bigger impact on the people that were coming through as, cadets, than I would if I was some sort of a supervisor, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, and not everybody that goes into that line of work has the opportunity to do that. So, I feel pretty blessed that I had that opportunity. And, it was good. I think, to be quite honest with you, I think, I don't think I would have done it any different, because having all those different things going for a guy like me. If one thing kind of got to be too much, I could refocus my time and my efforts to one of those other facets. So like if I'm getting a little burned out on one thing here, I can kind of go over here and do that. And it kept everything fresh so that it wasn't, because it's really, I mean, I don't care what anybody does for work. You're going to go through highs and lows. And, with police work, the highs and lows are way more drastic. Fishing too, I can see you have to have a great deal of patience to be a guide, and I've bumped elbows and been on the water with a lot of people in the guide industry, and some of them it's kind of just a grind and they go through it and they're still fantastic guides, but you can see how it wears on them. So I think it's like anything, if too much of a good thing can be a bad thing too. So I think it just kind of worked out for me,
So why did you, where you're at now, why not just retire, pack it up, and just kind of live your days fishing when you want to? Why do you stick with? Because you must be giving up some things to continue, right? I mean, people do as police officers retire, then they kind of just go off into the distance. Is there a reason why you stick? Like, sounds like you're going to keep guiding and tying flies. Is there a reason why you keep doing it?
Yeah, because of my personality.
Yeah.
I'm not a guy that can just kind of sit around and do nothing. Like I get up early in the morning and this is how my day starts. I'm typically up, even if I have nothing to do, I'm up at like 4 or 4:30, and I'm a raging type A. So like I have to be doing stuff. Like if I don't feel like I'm doing anything, I don't feel like I'm accomplishing anything. So, and it's like one of those things, if you don't get after it, you're never going to really get into something, or you're never going to be really good at it. So if you don't kind of seize the day with things, my thing is, well, you're kind of wasting my time. So I get up early. I might be tying an order of flies for somebody. I could be out in my garage working out. That's a big part of my life. I try to train and keep in shape because I want to live long and, see my grandkids someday. I guess you could say my business plan overall for myself is really good because I kind of control it. So, but I also know too that I can be my own worst enemy, because when the fishing's really good and the season kicks in, I'm not going to want to say no of people because over the years I've built, I'm sure a lot of guides, all the good guides will say the same thing. Over the years, you build a tremendous bond with your customers, and you'll have a huge client list, I guess you could say it, or group of people that they're the ones that really keep you busy because they just enjoy spending the time with you on the water, and you get to kind of see them progress. So I can kind of pick and choose who I want to go with, but I also don't want to turn people away. So I'm kind of in that unknown realm right now. I don't really know how crazy my schedule is going to get, but if it gets kind of crazy, I'm okay with it because I like being busy. That's just me. Because if I'm not, like I said, if I'm not guiding, I'm not tying, I'm not taking my kids fishing, spending time with my wife and kids, I'm going to be out digging in my garden. I like the garden, doing those kinds of things. So,
yep.
I'm a busybody.
You're not it doesn't sound like you're a person that sits behind the TV and watches the tube too much.
No, it's funny. I've watched in the last 5 or 6 months, I've probably watched more TV than I've watched in decades, because I actually had to have I had a minor knee surgery procedure done on my right knee. So, I was home, I was tying during most of this, but, I was still going to PT a couple days a week and whatnot. But, I've been utilizing my time at my bench now. I have a TV set up in there. So it's just like white noise, but
Yeah.
I'm behind. I know it's funny because my friends look at me like I'm some kind of idiot because I'm like, oh, I haven't watched that series yet. And I'm just watching Sons of Anarchy now.
Yeah.
All my friends are picking on me. So.
There you go.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's jump into a couple, you mentioned the Catching Shadows. I mean, that's the name of your website. Can you talk about that book and maybe describe it to somebody who maybe hasn't seen it or read it?
Sure. So like I told you before, I'm big on like fly fishing literature and all different facets. So when I got tasked to write that book, that I was talked to by Jay Nichols, who's like one of the lead editors for Headwaters and Stackpole, and he talked to me about doing a book on a bunch of my fly patterns. So my biggest thing and there's some great books out there. There's a lot of them that fall short too. So I'm kind of like I kind of geek out on books, and I guess I'm a pretty high critic of a lot of them. So my biggest thing was when I did this book, I didn't want it to just be a tying encyclopedia on, hey, these are some fly patterns that Rich Strolis came up with. This is how you tie them, and that's it. So the book details, it's broken into like 3 distinct sections of flies, and I know everybody looks at me for streamers, but there's streamers, nymphs, and dry flies in there. And I want to say there's like 22 or 24 different patterns that I have in there that are all unique to myself. And what I do in each chapter is I break down the fly, and it kind of has like some sort of a story that goes with them, because there's always a story with every kind of pattern, whether it was some sort of riddle I was trying to figure out on my own local waters, or I went on a trip and tried something just a little different. And then, there's those kinds of stories that are in there. Then it goes into the whole kind of, design and evolution process of that fly, and then the tying sequences. But it also tells you, here's how I fish it, which I think is a lot of times gets left out in a lot of books. There's some really good fly tying books out there. I mean, now most people go to like YouTube to look at fly tying stuff, which is crazy. So I wanted to kind of incorporate that in there. And it's, so you get a little bit more than your normal tying book.
Gotcha. Kind of ask about, you mentioned the Farmington River. Is that your home river? And if you had to pick, say, a couple of flies out of that book, which ones would they be to fish your home water if you're going there tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I would use the word home loosely. I probably fish there less now than I ever have. I used to fish there on a daily basis. And the reason being is I hate to sound negative, but it's the fishing pressure on that watershed is just through the roof now. Just because it's close in proximity to like 3 different metropolitan areas, and it gets a lot of pressure. So I actually spend a lot more time over on the Housatonic because I feel like I can get more of a western feel there. And some days the fishing might not be as good, but I can kind of get away from people, which is what a lot of us are drawn to the sport anyway. But I would say that the flies that I would pick would be, used on both fisheries. So I guess I would break it down into, again, I get this question all the time about streamers, and I think my streamer selections evolve every year. But if I had one of my streamer patterns, if we're talking one of the patterns out of that book that I would use all the time, would probably be the the HeadBanger Sculpin, just because it's super versatile. It's just a big fish catcher. That thing puts fish in the net all the time. You don't need a sinking line to fish it. So, it's a versatile streamer pattern. Probably the dry fly of choice would be like the shucked up emerger that I would use. Close second would probably be the rabbit's foot caddis that's in there. Those 2 flies I throw those all the time, like every season for caddis and mayfly hatches, and they're super interchangeable. So all you have to do is just change the size and the color. You can cover all your bases. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to nymphs, that's kind of hard because, I don't know. There's a bunch of different, I guess I would probably would pick, it'd be a toss-up between 3, which doesn't really give you a good answer. But like that little DDT nymph that I tie, I guess if you had to put a gun to my head, that would be the one I'd probably pick, or the cool body jig. But they all have their moments. I mean, a lot of the nymph and dry fly patterns are very more bug centric, so they're based around specific events and hatches. So
yeah,
but those two that I relayed there, I mean, you can use them as searching patterns, and they'll catch fish predominantly a good part of the time. So
yeah. And so on the, I guess if we do look at, say, the Farmington, it sounds like you fished that quite a bit, and you take that HeadBanger out there. Can you describe how you would, describe how you would get into fish and talk about which species you're focusing on there?
Yep. So the Farmington River is a pretty dynamic watershed. So it's about 82 miles long. It starts up, the headwaters are up in Massachusetts, and then it flows south into Connecticut. It goes through a couple of reservoirs, so it's a true tailwater. The two reservoirs that it flows through are pale in comparison to some of the western tailwaters. So when I say that, they're much smaller. So we will get, depending on how much rainfall we have and how full those two reservoirs are, we will get a water turnover, like usually like late summer. So it won't be blowing cold water anymore. It'll be flowing like 70-degree water, which isn't super bad, but it definitely affects the fish.
Yep.
And it continues south to the town of Farmington, and then it actually comes west, or east rather, and then goes north, and then goes back east out and dumps into the Connecticut River. And there's another dam down there as well. It's not a true tailwater; it's a smaller impoundment. But from that dam upriver, it's predominantly a trout fishery. Mostly brown. There's some wild brook trout in there, stocked brown trout and wild brown trout, rainbow trout as well. They've got a unique situation there where they do a survivor program where the state DEP comes in the fall and they do a sampling of the river, and they bring some of the wild stock back to the hatchery, and they hatch those fish, or they actually spawn them at the hatchery, and the eggs that go back into the river have come from those wild fish. That's why they have such a great holdover and growing wild population of brown trout. Now, as you go below that rainbow dam, that goes out into the Connecticut River, and you can get a plethora of different fish in there. Smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, pike, shad run up into there, some Atlantic salmon, very, very few, and striped bass. So the cool thing about that lower section is you can catch all kinds of cool stuff. But I'm primarily focused on the trout water, and it's usually there's about a 20-mile stretch from the Hogsback Dam down through into the town of Farmington. And that's kind of that's the water that gets hit the hardest. Tremendous amount of hours of fishermen, and for the right reasons. I mean, it's good trout water. It's probably the best in New England, arguably.
Yeah.
So, so you wanted me to answer that question on the HeadBanger.
Yeah,
correct?
that's for brown. If you were to fish that section it's mostly focused on browns, you'd be using the HeadBanger.
Yep, I would use that, and in up to a relative, and I would say moderate size. My moderate size streamer would be what some traditional trout fishermen would consider large, so 3.5 to 5 inches long. And articulated, and it's a weighted sculpin pattern. It has one of those helmets on the front of it, so you can fish that on a floating line. And I typically, it's going to get down and it dives and jigs and jives and does all that cool stuff. So I typically like to fish that with primarily an upstream presentation, up into riffles, slow pockets, inside seams of bends, things of that nature. And you manipulate that fly. One of the most productive ways to manipulate it is a strip pause type technique. So that basically that fly kind of jigs in the water column and comes up off the bottom.
Yep.
So that's kind of like one of the ways. There's many different ways that you can fish it, but that's probably one of the more productive ones.
Yeah, gotcha. And yeah, we've talked about that. I mentioned Kelly Galloup talked about some of that. We've had a couple of streamer episodes on here. So yeah, can you talk, if we stick on the streamer game for a little bit here, the HeadBanger's one, but just talk about, just generally speaking, what fly design, what you think about when you're designing your streamers.
A lot of different things, I mean, there's a couple different ways you could kind of break streamer design down. I think you could break it into, all right, I'm really trying to imitate a specific food form. And then there's the whole side of I'm trying to imitate some sort of an action built into the fly that's going to elicit a predatory strike out of that fish. Mm-hmm. So, I'm more of the guy, I don't tie a lot of bait fish specific style flies, although I do fish them from time to time, but I'm more of the lean towards that. I'm looking to achieve some sort of an action out of the pattern that I'm building. And it might loosely represent some kind of food form. I mean, majority of the streamers represent a bait fish, to a degree. Some sort of bait fish, whether it's a sculpin, a darter, a dace, a small trout, sucker, smaller fish, things of that nature, or crustaceans like crayfish, heck, even frogs, mice, things like that. So when I sit down to kind of design something, I look at it, and I know Kelly said this, and I kind of the same school of thought as him. I delve into a lot of, the lures, a lot of the lures that we fish, because I started as a lure fisherman as a kid, and we all talk about the jointed rapala and the jitterbugs and the other types of rapalas and divers, the shad raps and all this kinds of cool stuff. And, you're looking for those different types of actions that you can incorporate and translate that into a fly design, so a lot of times how it comes down to is, if you look at a majority of the well-designed articulated streamer flies and even the non-articulated ones, there's some common themes in a lot of this newer, and I say, last 30 years types design. You've got a fly that's got more mass towards the head that's going to help make that fly kind of swim naturally like a fish would, so you have more bulk and mass up near the head to a degree, and softer, more, looser materials towards the rear. So I usually go from there with that. And then where it's going to be fished in the water column, that's a whole other tier of things to consider. So like if I want something that's going to be fished close proximity to the bottom, then, obviously I'm probably going to want something that's fished tight or tied on like some sort of a jig style hook, something that's going to invert. It's going to have to obviously have weight in it, so I can get it to the bottom faster. Or, if I'm going to be tying something that's going to be neutrally buoyant and I'm going to be using, an integrated sinking line to kind of help it break through the meniscus, then that fly is going to be designed a little bit different. So those are kind of the things that I look at first, and then I go from there.
Gotcha. And we had a couple questions here I was just going to run by before, so I don't forget about these from the Facebook group. Sure. Ken Lindy's was asking about, I think he's kind of just getting started more in fly tying, but he was asking about, how to make a fly presentable. So do you have any tips on, if somebody was tying some of these streamers to make a better, to make a better fly, or, if somebody's struggling to actually make a good looking fly, anything come to mind there?
Yeah, I mean, the key, especially, and this goes whether you're a commercial tyer or you're, the casual tyer who likes to fish a lot and you're just tying to fill your own boxes. The key comes down to just practice. So one of the best pieces of advice that I got early on was, if you really want to learn a pattern, try and tie 6 or 12 of them. And the key is when you can make all 6 or 12 of them look the same, then you've got that pattern nailed. Yeah. So you practice it. It all comes down with practice and time at the vise. So, we could spend hours talking about this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the best advice I could give him is, and the cool part about this is how I learned how I've got an ever-growing library of fly patterns in my head. And this is all based just on this simple fact of take a pattern that you're going to fish, or that you'd like to fish, or you have confidence in, and tie it in succession. Whether, like I said, it's 6 or 12, you want them all to look the same. So that's where you get your consistency there. Mm-hmm. Speed will come with time. So, some of the best advice I can give you is you don't have to be a commercial tyer to use these techniques, but it'll help you if you're just the casual tyers. Try to eliminate all those extra things that you're doing while you're tying. So you'll see a lot of really good tyers, and all commercial tyers for the most part don't put their scissors down. Mm-hmm. Their scissors are attached to their hand. Yep. Okay. Prep your materials. And I had a guy, it was funny, and no disrespect to him, we had a great conversation, a good debate, which is kind of hard to come by nowadays because everybody's so one-sided with stuff. Yep. he was actually really good, and he was kind of arguing with me about why I stage all my materials, and I don't think he quite understood why. He was trying to explain to me that, well, if you just tie it all in succession, because of his line of work with manufacturing processing, that it's proven to be faster. And I said, well, I would argue that till the cows came home.
Yeah.
So anyway, when I mean by staging, it's not just like, I'm not telling you to take a dry fly like a caddis or and just tie the tail, then throw it aside, and then tie all your tails, then go back in the bodies. But I stage tie certain flies that are multi-part, like a articulated streamer. It makes sense to do that. But what you want to do is hand pick all your materials first, and then you want to set them up in the order that they're tied. And for certain things, you can lay that stuff out ahead of time. Like we use marabou, for example, for tails on streamers. I'll hand pick all my marabou ahead of time, because you open up a bag of marabou, whether it's a pound or it's an ounce, not every feather in there is going to have exactly what you're looking for the tail of that fly. So if you do all that legwork ahead of time, it makes the tying process go by a lot easier. And then you're going to find that your tying is going to be a heck of a lot cleaner.
Yep.
So stage tying, that kind of stuff. And the cool thing is, back to what I initially said, was when you take that one pattern and you've tied it in succession 6 or 12 times, you've committed it to your memory. So you'll see, and it's hard for some people to kind of grasp that, but you'll see a lot of the really good tiers, they can just, okay, I know this fly, I've tied this before. They can go back. They don't have to look at a book. They don't need to pull it up somewhere. All right, these are the materials I know that I need for this, and it's in my memory bank, and I go back and I grab all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's kind of works twofold.
That's it. And the again, staying on that HeadBanger pattern, can you describe? And I'll put a link in the show notes to a video for it. But can you describe how, just briefly, how you tie that fly?
Sure. It's basically another part of this fly is like a woolly bugger on steroids with some additions. So if you were to look at the body on it, it's got a marabou tail, that envelope, and it's a palmered marabou. It's usually multicolored, so that gives you a two-tone effect in the tail. Mm-hmm. It takes a little bit more time to tie it that way, but it gives you a much more pleasing looking fly, and I think it models the pattern a lot better, like a natural sculpin, because sculpins have a mottled color to them. That's more for us than the fish, but if it looks good and you feel comfortable with it, that's kind of what I want to do. Has a piece of holographic flash or a couple strands in between that. So you basically start with the flash, you palmer just like you're doing a popsicle for swinging, marabou style tail on there like that. And then there's a like a cactus chenille underbody. Schlappen feather is palmered through that. So you've got some soft material. It's just a filler. I like to call that like body filler. And then you got a couple of rubber legs in there, like barred crazy legs. And those are, I like to consider those are just fluff. They're extra. They make the fly look good, but do you really need them? Probably not. Yep. Especially when it comes to commercial flies, you got to have bin appeal. When I say bin appeal, it catches the fisherman, not the fish.
Right.
And then the wing on it is reverse tied Arctic foxtail. So I use that because it gives this fly like a really good 3-dimensional profile, and it's tied on the top half of the hook, or which would actually be the bottom, because this fly rides inverted. It's weighted. And it's the same process for the front. And then when you get up towards the head, there's the gills on this, or not the gills, but the pectoral fins are made out of like laser dub.
Oh yeah.
And then you have a helmet on there. So you're basically repeating all those steps from the back on the front, and it's articulated. So
that's it. So basically, it's the same fly, just tied twice. You got one, the back and the front's the same fly, just put together with articulation.
Yeah, and the variations of this that I've tied, because I've been tying this fly for 12 years now, and Roman Moser was the one who came up with these weighted heads years ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's known for the bead head, all that good stuff. And then Martin at Flyman Fishing came up with a kind of, I don't want to say it's not a knockoff, but it's another style sculpin helmet. It's not quite as heavy. It's not made out of tungsten. That has been popularized and used here, and that's what's kind of on the front of this, and it keels it. But when I tie these, I've tied these for such a wide variety of species of fish. I've even got guys that are using they're tied on a shank with a trailer hook and swinging these in Alaska for steelhead and salmon, and for rainbow trout. Same thing. I've had some sent them out to the Pacific Northwest for that. I had guys catching taimen on these things. This is a killer. I mean, I tied it for brown trout, but this is a killer smallmouth fly. Yeah. I can't tell you how many smallmouth I catch on these every year, because the beauty of the Housatonic over here is it's a blue ribbon smallmouth fishery. So when the trout fishing is not good, that's usually when the smallmouth can always keep a bend in your rod. So
yeah, gotcha, cool. And I'll put a link to again some of the head and stuff you talk about. What about hooks? What do you like to use for hooks on that fly?
I guess you could say. So I guess everybody who's involved in our sport, any facet, has got like certain things. Guys like to call them fetishes or things that they're hung up on. Hooks is one of those things where I got a serious problem with hooks, like bad. But I have to have a lot of hooks on hand because I tie so many flies. So I'm a realist with, and I think my ideas kind of go hand in hand with my tying mentality. Is I don't follow the mentality of this fly pattern has to absolutely be tied with this fox fur that was urinated on from, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If I can find something that's relatively close to that behaves the same way or has the same kind of structure to it that's going to achieve the same end result, by all means, I'm going to substitute it. So the same thing with hooks. So I don't like to prescribe to one hook company. I kind of found multiples that I like, but there are probably 4 companies that I use the most. When it comes to streamer hooks, Gamakatsu is at the top of the pile all the time. I love their hooks for streamer hooks. They're the most readily available for the commercial tire. I like some of the Partridge designs as well. The one knock with Partridge, and I love their hooks, is they're not always readily available. So I have to have some sort of, alternative. And then probably the other one that I tie with the most when it comes to streamers, and I'm tying with more now, are the Ahrex hooks. I've been very, very impressed. Morton's doing awesome stuff over there, and his hooks have been pretty darn available. So their saltwater stuff I wasn't too impressed with in the beginning, but he's got some new blue water style stuff that's fantastic. So I'm kind of having an affinity towards his stuff. When it comes to bugs and, wet flies, nymphs, dry flies, things of that nature, I run the gamut. I really do. I have a lot of flies that I tie for guys that like to tightline nymphs. So, they want the super long beaks and barbless hooks. A lot of those hooks are like that nickel finish. So like I'll have, I tie with same thing, Partridge, Honox. I've just got into dealing with a lot of the firehole stuff. I really like some of his hooks. Let's see. I use a lot of Daiichi stuff too. Daiichi, Tiemco, TMCs. Yep. And some of the new Ahrex stuff. I mean, the Ahrex, one of my favorite new hooks from them. I'm not to make this sound like it's an Ahrex commercial here, because I'm not getting paid by them. Yeah. But I really, really like their barbless nymph hook. It's awesome. It's stout. That's the thing you run into with some of the smaller hooks, is sometimes you get a good fish on a 14 and smaller and they bend out on you. These things aren't bending out. So
nice.
Been very, very impressed with it. So I guess you could say I have my personal preferences for styles of hooks that I like by certain companies, but if I can't get those or I'm out, I have to have backup options. So I like to keep it wide open.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Good. No, that's great. I think, there's a ton of killer companies out there. Well, we're going to start to kind of wrap this thing up, and I was kind of hinting on this a little bit, but the 222 is, top 2 tips, top 2 flies, top 2 resources. And we've already been talking about flies. Tips wise, do you have a couple either maybe some tips for fishing streamers or for tying streamers? Anything we haven't talked about here?
Yeah, I think with fishing streamers is the one question, and I'm sure Kelly said this to you when you interviewed him. He'll tell you the same thing. Everybody always asks, what's the best retrieve to fish a streamer? And there really isn't one, to be honest with you. What you have to do is you have to look at every time you go fishing, with streamers as a clean slate. All right. And, you have obviously a memory bank of techniques and, retrieves and pauses and strips and manipulations with the rod that worked for you in the past. And that's a good baseline to start with. But you have to think, you know what, if you get caught, and then we all do this no matter how you fish, you get caught doing the same thing over and over again. And it's productive for a certain amount of time, and then it shuts off. And we still do the same thing, and the results have gone by the wayside, and we don't change. So I think the biggest thing is when it comes to fishing streamers is kind of be progressive, move around, try some different things, vary your technique until you find what the fish is responding to. Okay. I know Kelly's big on changing colors, and he's got a lot of time put into that, and I see how it works. And I also think too, you can make yourself crazy with that from time to time too. If you've got a hot, it's not so much the color. I think a lot of times it's finding where the fish are in the water column and what kind of retrieve or style of fly is going to get them to induce a strike. So I think that's another thing to take into consideration. And I'm not knocking his color thing. I'm just think about that a little bit. I'd be more apt to change the style of fly and where I'm fishing it as opposed to the color.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you're not necessarily changing out like him. I think he says every few minutes he's changing out his fly. You're not really doing that.
No, he changes flies a lot. I don't know if he does it every 5 minutes. He's probably gonna want to punch me in the neck for saying that, but he changes his colors a lot. I had the opportunity to fish with him on the white this year, so it was really cool sharing a boat with him, and hope to do that again soon. But he does change a lot, and he's got a lot of really. And it's funny because the cool thing about getting in a boat with a guy like him is he thinks a lot about stuff and doesn't just go through the motions, which I like that, because I think that's how you get better. If you just go out there and do the same thing over and over again, you don't literally learn much, So you have to kind of sit there and question what you're doing. The one other thing I will say about streamer fishing, and this is why I think I gravitate toward it so much, because all of us kind of got into fly fishing, I think, for the most part, because it's a challenge. It's not the easiest way to catch fish. No. So I know, and I'm going to catch some heat for saying this, and I'm not trying to be negative, but I feel like there's been a progression in fly fishing and fly tying where we're really dumbing things down to get to the end result of catching fish or catching more fish. And that's a whole other topic. But I think with streamer fishing, why I'm drawn to it is because it kind of ups the ante with a challenge. And some people argue, all you do is throw it out there and pull it back. That's not really the case. No. I'm like, if that's the case, more people would probably be doing it. I think a lot of people don't gravitate towards streamer fishing that much is because there are days where you go out there, and if you don't get that result right away, people are more apt to switch back to maybe tight line and nymphs because it's ultra productive a lot more, So I enjoy the challenge out of it. And the biggest piece of advice with it, if you're somebody that's new to it, is don't give up so easily. Okay. I mean, I think people are very apt to throw the towel in real quick just because they're not getting the response that they want right away. I mean, some days you might step in it. The second you throw that first fly on, you start casting and you're whaling on fish. There's going to be a lot more days where you don't. It's not always like that. And I think that's kind of the draw to it is trying to figure out what you can get. What do you have to do to get those fish to eat? So my biggest thing is, aside from varying your retrieves, is don't hang them up on it so quick. The only way you're going to learn is to put the time in on it, and some days you're going to put more in than others.
Yep. Perfect. And just wrapping up that 222. So top 2 resources. Anything out there that maybe isn't your own stuff that you would recommend for somebody that wants to dig into, I guess into streamers more?
I mean, I'm just kind of repeating the obvious. I mean, Kelly's got a plethora of stuff. He's doing a lot of videos now. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of guys out there that people probably, some lesser known guys, some guys you do know. Mike Schmidt he's a multifaceted guy right now. He's doing a lot of different things, but he's got a lot of cool stuff out there with streamers. There's a couple of brothers out of Michigan, Matt and Ahrex. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them.
No.
Matt is you might want to interview, if not one, probably both of those guys at some point. Ahrex is a musky guide on Lake St. Clair. And him and his brother, they're some of the fishiest guys. I've been in the boat with Matt, but I've never fished with Ahrex, and Ahrex is just a musky machine. But Matt's probably one of the unsung heroes in streamer design, in my opinion. I don't think he gets a lot of lot of people probably inadvertently have borrowed ideas from him that they don't even know. And he's not one of those guys that's really out there pushing his stuff, but he's a super sound tire, does some crazy stuff, big flies, for musky stuff for trout. Me and him kind of met through the internet like 15 years ago because we kind of think similarly when it comes to fly design, and we've got a couple of fly patterns that are really close to one another that kind of came out around the same time, and we didn't even know each other. So it's really bizarre. So he's some guy. I mean, I could run a list of dudes. I don't really get into. There's so many people doing videos and stuff now. The market for that's kind of flooded.
Yep.
And some are good and some are bad. And I'm not here to kind of like, I think that's Kelly talked about this before, where we're kind of in a renaissance with tying and electronics and all that stuff. But at the same time, there's the other side of it where it's hard for the new guy to really kind of decipher the good from the bad because it's so flooded out there. And there's this whole different thing going on now where you can kind of fake it to make it. If you know what I'm saying.
Yep.
So, and this is a topic I'm not going to really get too much into, but there's a lot of people out there that, it's hard to find the people that have really put the time in from those who are basically beg, borrowing, and stealing from the guys that have really put the time in and done their homework and know what they're doing.
Yep.
So, it's kind of difficult. So those ones there, like I said, Kelly's got a plethora of stuff there. When it comes to tips for fishing, I mean, George Daniel's written some really good books. If guys want to read books, his books are good out there. There's a bunch of good tying books that are out there. I know Charlie Craven just came out with a new streamer book. It's really good. Charlie's attention to detail is fantastic. That's kind of where that's at.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'll put links to those. I've interviewed Charlie and George both, and awesome, really great interviews, tons of fun. So I'll put some links to that. And, before we head out, I just want to wrap this up with a little rapid fire round here. And just quickly, I had one other question. Glenn in the Facebook group also was asking about, maybe you can briefly touch on, catching fish in low water conditions. I'm not sure. It sounds like the Farmington is kind of a tailwater, so it sounds like it's pretty constant. But if you're out there fishing and the water gets pretty low, do you change? How do you change your streamer fishing?
Yeah, so I do, and I spent an entire season just to prove a point fishing. We had drought-like conditions on the Farmington where they were basically running a normal flow on that river, and it's maybe a river that's like 40 feet across on average, typically runs at like 350 CFS is a good normal flow where the stream bed's covered, etc. They were running about 75 to 90 CFS for a prolonged period of time. The water was still relatively cool in most parts until you got, into the summertime and whatnot. But I spent an entire year fishing under low water conditions because, I can't tell you how many people say, oh, you can't catch fish on big streamers when the water's low or it's clear. Yeah. And that's just complete nonsense. So you have to change your whole mentality. I mean, it's kind of like fishing high water. When the water's high, a lot of times you don't need to get into the water. You're fishing from the bank because the fish are tight to the bank. You have to kind of figure out where they're at. When the water's low, you're going to be walking in exposed stream beds. So you need to look for those buckets and pockets that are going to hold those fish. When I go out and I fish under lower water conditions and I commit to the streamer thing, I don't bring a sinking line. I'm fishing primarily all lightly weighted to moderately weighted streamers on a floating line setup, and I definitely make sure that I'm fishing them almost exclusively on an upstream presentation, because even when you're walking on bedrock or loose rock that's typically underwater, you're sending shock waves through a lot of that stuff. And if you're right next to those fish, they're going to know the gig's up, you're there. So I try to fish from a downstream position. I might have to go a little bit. That's probably the only time I'll actually contemplate on using like fluorocarbon in a streamer leader. More often than not, I'm just using straight mono. And my leader might actually be a little bit longer so that I'm not throwing my fly line over the fish. And that's where those weighted flies like that, I mean, a HeadBanger is a perfect example. I'll go with a lighter variation of that in those lower conditions. And the colors that I pick during those times are very important too. You want your earth tones, your natural colors. So, I'm not going to go and throw some big crazy purple chartreuse colored fly when the water's like gin clear and super low. You might get the occasional fish on it, but more often than not, they're going to be keying in on that natural stuff. And the biggest question that comes up, well, what colors do you pick? Well, obviously, your earth tones, your olives, your browns, blacks, tans. But if you're not quite sure what color to check, take a look at the stream bottom, because your bait fish and any of your smaller food items are going to take on the color of that stream bed. So, I've seen it. I've done river samplings where we've shocked sculpins that are, tan in one stretch of river and go 100 feet down river, and the bottom is like a mossy color and they're like almost jet black. So that's the kind of stuff I look for.
Cool.
Slower approach,
That's awesome.
So.
Yeah, those are great tips for sure. Well, let's take us out of here. We got a couple of just quick questions for you, some random questions here. You mentioned college sports. What was your? Did you have a sport you kind of excelled in college? You played?
I had a couple. I actually, and I never continued to go. It's kind of a funny story. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with myself, so I went the junior college route to kind of figure things out, changed my major 1,000 times, and then when got into the law enforcement thing and went to a 4-year school. While I was in junior college, because my high school was a small, regional school in Western Massachusetts, and we had a really limited amount of sports. So it was either soccer, basketball, or baseball at my high school. And I wasn't into soccer, so I played baseball and basketball. Probably would have played football or hockey, wrestled, or any of that. Played both basketball and baseball in junior college. I played 1 year of basketball, and it was just too much on the knees, so I stopped. And then baseball was kind of my thing. My father didn't talk to me for a year when I stopped playing baseball. So,
really?
I was like, I think I made all Western Mass for baseball and basketball, but baseball was definitely the sport I excelled at.
What position?
So it's kind of jack of all trades. I was more of an outfielder because I had a really good arm. So I played like center, right.
Yep.
I pitched too, but my mechanics were terrible. If I had worked on my mechanics, I probably could have been a decent pitcher. And if I'd stuck with it, I probably would have gone on to play at a 4-year school. But my thing was, if I had the passion for baseball that I had with fly fishing, I might have been able to do something with it. Not saying I would go pro,
right?
But it just wasn't there, and I didn't want to do it anymore. I appreciate the sport, but it just wasn't there. I still watch a lot of sports. I love sports, but I didn't have that fire like I do with the fishing stuff. So
cool. And what about on the HeadBanger as far as I guess I'm thinking about music. Is that kind of where that name come? Or are you kind of like HeadBanger type music, or what are you into for
Yeah,
tunes?
It's kind of funny. So there's some backstory to that too. So that name kind of came up twofold because I do like some heavy metal music, but also, if you don't open your cast up with this fly, you're going to take it off the head.
Oh, right.
So, some of the names of some of the flies I have are from some 80s and 90s, metal bands and whatnot. Like one of the ones I just did, the AOD, which is the Angel of Death. That's like a Slayer song. I listen to a wide variety of music. Classic rock, all that good stuff. But I still if I know when I'm going to go out into my gym and I need to, like me and my friends say, we like to go out there and haze ourselves in the gym. I need some heavy music. So I think you could say like some of the flies that I've come up with, that's where that kind of comes from, is that, the heavy music type stuff. So
that's it. And what about, and Sam again in the Facebook group mentioned something about a rant. You're pretty good on the rants. Have you had in this conversation today, would you consider anything you had today a rant, or do you want to take us out of here with a good rant?
Yeah, I think I had a little bit of a rant when I got on the, fake it to make it thing.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I feel things are a little different. And a couple of the guys that I talked to, I have a big circle of friends of people in the industry, both much older than me, some in my age group. And a lot of times we kind of scratch our heads, and I don't get on these rants to be malicious. I know a lot of people are thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes every day I kind of scratch my head at where things are going nowadays. And one of my biggest things is I've always tried I know I'm not perfect. I've got a lot of faults, but I always try to sit back and look at things and from a guide perspective or somebody in the industry and, what's the right thing to do, I think as guides, and I think this is getting lost and I hate to paint people with a wide brush, but I think this is really getting lost with a lot of our younger, and I hate to say the millennial crowd, but, they've lost sight of the whole idea of what being a guide entails. And, as a guide, you're a steward of the fishery that you run your business on. So I see there's a percentage of guys that are really good about it, but there's also, I feel like there's more people now in that younger bracket that it's all about the likes. It's all about getting those fish out there and putting those fish pictures up and the grip and grins. And, they're not doing it for the right reasons. And a lot of them, they like the idea, and I'm probably going to get some hate for saying this, but I think it needs to be said. And I know a lot of people are thinking it. They like the idea of what fly fishing is and the whole concepts on it and being conservative and, preserving our fisheries, but they're not doing anything. They're not doing anything in that realm, and it's like anything. I can speak on experience from it. Most fishing clubs, 90% of the work gets done by 5 to 10% of the people that are involved in it.
Yep.
And it's like that in a lot of things now. Everybody wants to be cool because, this is the cool thing to do now, but nobody wants to put the work in anymore. And I think that goes across the board.
Yeah.
And it's kind of disheartening because, the younger people, and I'm still kind of young, I'm 45, but, there's a whole younger generation of us that if that gets lost, in translation, it's not good for our sport.
No.
Yeah. And I hope a lot of people hear that and they take it to heart because you know what? Like when guys my age, a lot of the people that I looked up to in the fly fishing world are passing away now.
Mm-hmm.
One of which, God rest his soul, was a great guy, Dave Brand. He just passed away the other day. So and I hate to say it, this sounds awful, but a lot of the older guard and fly fishing in the industry they're dropping like flies right now.
Yeah.
So where's that leave us? It's like, I'm all about people getting into this sport, both facets of fly fishing and fly tying.
Yep.
I think it's great. But also too, like, you want to show them the right way of doing things. Just because you can do something doesn't mean it's right.
Totally. No, it's an interesting conversation. I think that for me, I always feel like, getting more people into fly fishing is, even though it puts more pressure and stuff, it seems like it's a good thing because eventually, even if those people don't know about it, it seems like as they get more into it, that conservation just comes along with it, right? Because people realize, oh yeah, of course, I want to conserve what I love, And so it's interesting to have this conversation because, do you think more of these people are people that are just starting out and just kind of going off, or do you think these are people that have been doing it a little while and just don't care?
Well, I don't know. I think there's a lot of different dynamics that are going on. So, this could be a whole other topic, but it's like one of the topics that comes up with me and a lot of my friends that I talk to on a regular basis is, and it doesn't just go into fly fishing. I think it kind of goes with society overall, is the acceptance of mediocrity. So, I think that's really coming into our sport a bit. There's a lot of people that want to get into guiding, and as a guide, I think it's like putting the cart before the horse. So somebody gets into fishing and now all of a sudden they want to be a guide, but what are they really bringing to the table for their customers? So me personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable if I was thrown into the mix by that, if I didn't have a good handle on, hey, not just getting myself into fish, but kind of figuring out a lot of these situations that are out there. So, I think that's part of it. I think, like I said, there's a whole demographic of, and this goes to a whole other thing, but I like the whole dumbing down of certain things. Like we've got, and I know people like to look at things of the progression and being progressive. That's a term I think that gets overused, but we'll take, and then this is going to be a big rant that I know a lot of guys probably aren't going to like, but so fishing with a mono rig on a fly rod, are we still fly fishing?
Right.
It's highly effective,
Yeah.
highly effective. I've done it. So, but at the same time, are we still fly fishing?
I like the when you talk about that, fly fishing being that you have to casting is part of, if you're not casting, then I think you're stretching it, right? And I guess with
I don't know.
Yeah.
Because there's a demographic of anglers, and I see it on my home waters where I've had them in the front of my boat, and you put a rod in their hand and say, all right, dude, cast that streamer to the bank, and they can't even throw 15 feet of fly line.
Yeah.
But you give them a mono rig and a couple of weighted nymphs, and they can. We have a funny term that me and my friends call it. Listen, I like the tight line nymph too. It works. It's highly effective. If you got a little bit of time and you want to catch some fish, that's the best way to catch fish, hands down.
Yeah.
But we like to call it pendulum nymphing, because you look like you're pendulum fishing, because you're just lobbing a couple weighted flies up the river and then stomping through and doing that all the way through. So I think that's a facet of fishing and fly fishing. You can argue if it's fly fishing or not. I mean, I'd be a hypocrite if I told you I have not done that before. I have. Yeah. But I sit here now, maybe I'm becoming an old curmudgeon, but I'm looking at things a little differently. And it's funny because some of the things that I remember hearing when I was younger from some of the older guys, now I'm looking at like, wow, I'm looking at things a little differently. So either I'm becoming a little wiser, or maybe I'm questioning things a little more. So if that's all you can do, and there's so many other things you can do with a fly rod, which is the greatest thing about fly fishing, especially for trout, it gives you such a broad spectrum of ways you can catch trout. If you can't cast a fly line, that's the basis basics of fly fishing when you get into it, is learning how to cast. And a lot of people, that's all they like to do. Yeah. When they first get into it, is just they get pure enjoyment out of casting that fly line. Yeah. But if you can't even do that, then I don't know. I sit here and, like I said, it makes me kind of scratch my head a little bit. And I'm like, I'm not going to paint people with a wide brush, but there's a lot of guides now I see in my neck of the woods. That's all they're teaching people. Newbies coming out, they've never fly fished before, and they're just putting a 10 or 11 foot rod in their hand with no fly line and having them lob weighted nips. And I'm just like, did you even show them how to cast? So like, I don't know. I think that's where I say we're dumbing things down, and we're losing. Yeah. We're losing. It's losing its face. Like the face of the sport is kind of losing it a little bit. And I know I'm friendly with a lot of the comp anglers, and some of the comp anglers feel, a lot of them, if not most, feel the same way, because, they see people trying to infiltrate into the whole competition fly fishing side of things. And that's all they can do is Thailand nymph. But what are you going to do when that doesn't work?
Yeah, there's 20% of the time where those guys are actually using dry flies or wet flies, right?
Right, but you still got to be able to do it.
You got to be able to do it. That's awesome.
And like I said, I try to be. I hate that word PC and politically correct, because I think it's ridiculous. I'm more of a call a spade kind of guy, and I think now that I'm a little bit older, I'm more to kind of call that kind of stuff out. But like, think about this for a second, guys. Like, what are we doing? Like, let's not lose, the basis of the whole sport.
Yeah,
and I kind of think that's where things are going. There's a ton of great stuff too. And like I said, I think we definitely need more people in the sport, because, there's another term that I think is a little vastly overused, the fly fishing community. I think it's used in the wrong way. I don't know about you, but when I got into fly fishing, the beauty of it was to kind of get away from everything and not be surrounded by all kinds of other stuff. And I see it on a river right here that gets 300-something thousand hours of a year of fishermen in an 8-mile stretch.
Damn.
Like, how do you get solitude there? So like, I didn't get into fly fishing for the community. The community of it is, hey, we're off the river now. I'm going to meet you at the pub or something. We're going to have a beer and we're going to talk about our day. Or we're going to talk about maybe a topic in a club now that's a hot button topic that potentially could be devastating to our fishery. That's the community side of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I don't look at it. I don't look at being on the water as a communal thing. I mean, the communal part of it might be me and two guys in my boat with me, but not when I'm out there waiting. You know what I'm saying? So I think, I don't know, I got a different outlook on things, but maybe I'm a curmudgeon now.
No, that's good. That's a perfect, as Sam was looking for, I think that was a great rant to take us out of here on. We dug into, this has been a lot of fun, kind of digging into, I think, mostly streamers, and, it's always the struggle is trying to get dig into everything, which we obviously didn't, but I think at least we got a few rants in, so I'm happy about that. But thanks again for coming on.
Anytime. I appreciate you having me.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/138. A little reminder on the new podcast, if you get a chance, would love it if you could head over to outdoorsonline.co and have a quick listen. We've got some good stuff going on there, and would love it if you could take a look. Thanks again today for stopping by. I'm definitely looking forward to catching up with you soon. I hope to maybe see you online or on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.